Good afternoon. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Media Network LLC. And on this episode of Lest We Forget History, we are going to talk about gerrymandering. That's GERRYMANDERING. This article comes from the History Channel, and the title is How Gerrymandering Began in the U.S. And we're going to be talking more about this, so listen up because it affects who gets elected. It's written by Becky Little and it was updated by August 2025. So, what is gerrymandering? Well, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. But we're not going to start with ABC. We're going to start in March 1812. The Boston Gazette ran a political cartoon depicting a new species of monsters never be seen before in the US of A. And it's called the Gerry, GERRY hyphen Mander, MANDER. The forked tongue creature was shaped like a contorted Massachusetts voting district that the state's Jeffersonian Republicans had drawn to benefit their own party. The governor and eventual future vice president, Elbridge Gerry, signed off on his party's redistricting plan in February, and he unwittingly cemented his place in the U.S. lexicon of underhanded political tricks. Federalist newspapers in Massachusetts reprinted this cartoon with a portmanteau of Gerry and salamander, helping the new world to take off. Although the pronunciation just changed over time, Gerry's name is now pronounced like Gary. But Americans now pronounce the word bearing his name like Gerry, Jerry, Mander. The meaning has mostly remained the same. Gerrymandering is when politicians redraw voting districts to benefit their political party. Does that remind you of something that's been happening since the current president took office? The practice of manipulating voting districts to secure political power predates the fearsome gerrymander. In the 18th century, England political operatives created rotten boroughs with only a few eligible voters, making it easy for politicians to buy the residents' votes and gain seats in parliaments. Well, that makes sense. Most of our founding fathers and people who grew up here in the States came, you guessed it, from England, Great Britain, Scotland, Wales, the Irish. After the English colonists founded the United States, gerrymandering began almost immediately, says Thomas Hunter, a political science professor at the University of West Georgia. There's evidence, quote, that Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina drew districts to benefit some candidates over others in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And still, these gerrymandered districts were relatively, quote, normal, unquote, looking compare what would come later. So, what do you think about what they did in Massachusetts in 1812 really was on steroids compared to what had gone on before, Hunter says. That's because the 1812 Massachusetts gerrymandering was more brazen about contorting districts into odd shapes to maximize a party's gain. Even though the Jeffersonian Republicans received roughly 49% of the vote, they won 29 of the 40 seats in the state Senate. which led to a backlash against the state's Jeffersonian Republican Party, not to be confused, the Republican Party established in 1854. The next year, the Federalists regained control of the state legislature. Ironically, it was the Jeffersonian Republicans' thinly drawn districts that allowed the party to lose them with only a small shift in political opinion. Once in power, the Federalists redrew the districts. The 1813 election inspired cartoons showing the original gerrymander, but now showing it as a skeleton. Hunter says these cartoons suggested that the election had killed off the monster. And though the Massachusetts monster was dead, the practice of gerrymandering continued for over 2 centuries, usually increasing or decreasing depending on the intensity of a two-party competition at the time. There are fewer obvious incidents of gerrymandering during the so-called, quote, era of good feelings from 1815 to 1825, after politicians established the rival Democratic and Whig parties. When African Americans won the right to vote after the Civil War, gerrymandering was taken up a notch, Hunter says. Southern states in particular drew districts to maximize the electoral advantage for the Democratic Party, which most white Southern voters supported, over the Republican Party, which most African American voters supported. This is when states started to draw more long, stringy districts, he says. The goal of these was to concentrate as many African American voters as possible into one district so that the rest of the districts would have a white majority. In 1874, South Carolina introduced its first non-contiguous voting district, but had to change back to contiguous districts for the 1876 election because the U.S. House of Representatives told the state it wouldn't seat any more members elected under such a system. In 1882, South Carolina created a boa constrictor district that concentrated African Americans who made up the majority of the state's population into one winding district, so that every other district had a white majority. In the 20th century, gerrymandering fell off due to the success of suppressing African American voters through poll taxes, the threat of lynching, and other insidious tactics, because the only people who could vote in southern states were white, and usually Democrats, and the white Democratic establishment didn't feel it needed to manipulate districts to maintain its majority. Oh my goodness. And then in 1960, it was called the redistricting revolution, which challenged gerrymandering. After the 1900 census, some states didn't change their districts at all until the 1960s. And as more people moved into cities, particularly African Americans and immigrants, these states maintained districts that gave disappropriate power to white, rural, non-immigrant Americans. The U.S. Supreme Court changed this in the 1960s with a series of court decisions known as the redistricting revolution. Under Chief Justice Earl Warren, the court ruled that all state voting districts must have roughly equal the population. In addition, states must adjust their federal government congressional districts after every 10-year census, so each of the 435 members in the U.S. House of Representatives represents roughly the same number of people. Combined with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which protected African Americans' right to vote, The Supreme Court decisions ensured voters were more evenly representative in their state legislature and in the U.S. House of Rep. Quote, the court signaled out the U.S. Senate as a unique institution whose members didn't need to represent the same number of people. But within a couple of decades, computer technology made it easier for political operatives to strategically map districts to benefit their party under the new rules. You got district schemes after the 1990s that were completely unlike anything you ever seen before, Hunter says. North Carolina's 12th district became known as the I-85 district because it basically ran along the interstate highway, at one point growing narrower than the highway itself. Modern forms of gerrymandering continue, says Hunter, who adds, in some ways, it's politicians picking their voters as opposed to voters picking their politicians. So, for those people who always wanted to know where the terminology gerrymandering came from, now you know. Please go over to our website, passionworldtalkradio.com/blog. Read the synopsis of what took place in today's podcast episode. Listen or view the podcast on the blog as well. There is the URL for history.com/gerrymandering. Go take a look at the full article, print it off, and if you're in favor of gerrymandering, let us know. And if you're not in favor of gerrymandering, let us know on what you recommend, what you think would be fair and equitable to everybody. Because, ladies and gentlemen, and kids over the age of 18, these people work for us. We do not work for them. We can fire them and get somebody else who can do a better job. There's enough young people now who should think about entering the race and make it profitable for the districts that they're representing. Please send all comments, thoughts, recommendations, and suggestions to pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. And Happy New Year.